up as a kid, yeah. All a nigga wanna have was a Burberry scarf and $3 in my pocket. Instead I got beat with a switch, but I don't give a fuck, but it's on my body. Scars all up on me, but I run around from.
My players to watch during NFL training camp for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2020. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers, I mean, the first thing I'm going to be watching is all of the quarterbacks. I'm going to be watching Ben Roethlisberger. How good is he going to be throwing the football coming off that elbow injury that he suffered last season? So I'm going to be watching Big Ben. I'm going to be looking for the timing that he has with these new young group of wide receivers, Diontae Johnson, who he didn't really get a chance to play all that much with because Diontae Johnson kind of emerged after Big Ben went down with that injury. I also want to see how is he going to do with new tight end Eric Ebron. And how good is he going to look throwing the football during training camp? Then after Big Ben, I'm watching all of the other quarterbacks because the biggest talk for the Steelers, other than Ben Roethlisberger, has been who is going to be the backup quarterback. Now you got Mason Rudolph, Devlin Doug Hodges, you got Paxton Lynch, you got JT Barrett. I'm going to be watching all of these quarterbacks. Now Mason Rudolph is penciled in as QB number 2, but I still think that his job is still up for grabs. Then you got Paxton Lynch. He's listed as QB number 3, but his job could be up for grabs as well. And I'm not sleeping on Paxton Lynch. A lot of you guys are really sleeping on Paxton Lynch. But Paxton Lynch last preseason for Seattle when he was competing with Geno Smith for that backup quarterback spot, that was a battle that was neck and neck. That battle could have went either way. So, I mean, I'm not sleeping on Paxton Lynch. I'm also not sleeping on JT Barrett as well. So, I mean, I'm just going to be watching all of the quarterbacks for the Steelers during NFL training camp. Next up is the halfbacks. Now, the halfbacks I'm going to be watching in particular is Benny Snell and rookie halfback Anthony Mcfarlane. Now, Benny Snell became, in my opinion, the Steelers' second best halfback on the roster behind James Conner near the end of the 2019 season. I felt like he surpassed Jalen Samuels, and I said when I did my Steelers halfback preview for this season that Benny Snell, I feel, could end up becoming halfback number 2 over Jalen Samuels. And a lot of Steelers fans got upset with me. But, I mean, Jalen Samuels just wasn't all that impressive last season. And he got outperformed and outworked by Benny Snell. And we saw that because Benny Snell, week after week, kept on putting up good performances and taking out away carries from Jalen Samuels. And eventually, Benny Snell ended up becoming the second best back on the roster. So, when you look at Benny Snell, I think that he could potentially end up being halfback number 2 on the depth chart, depending on how good he performs during training camp. Anthony Mcfarlane is another guy. Now, Anthony Mcfarlane was a rookie drafted in this past year's NFL draft out of the University of Maryland. And this guy is basically a threat to score a touchdown every single time he touches the football. This guy is explosive. He's fast, he's quick, he's physical. He reminds me a little bit of Dalvin Cook. I'm really excited to watch him. Then receivers, Diontae Johnson and Chase Claypool are pretty much going to be the talk of training camp for the Steelers. Now, some people probably will be paying attention to Juju Smith-Schuster since he did suffer a lot of injuries last season and he didn't really play all that well. But I'm not really all that concerned about Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that he should bounce back with Ben Roethlisberger back at the helm at quarterback. But I'm interested in watching Diontae Johnson and Chase Claypool. Now, we already know Diontae Johnson was the MVP of the Steelers offense last season back in 2019. Now, a lot of people believe that he's going to end up being the next Antonio Brown. And the question remains to be decided. It could be a little bit of a position battle. Because a lot of people feel like Diontae Johnson is good enough to become that wide receiver number 1 for the Steelers. And the Steelers could go ahead and move Juju Smith-Schuster back to slot. Now, I still think that Juju Smith-Schuster is most likely going to end up being wide receiver 1 to start the season out. If Diontae Johnson ends up being wide receiver number 2. But maybe that changes. If Diontae Johnson has a strong training camp and he outperforms and outworks Juju Smith-Schuster, then maybe he could start the season out as wide receiver number 1 for the Steelers. Then I'm interested in watching Chase Claypool. Now, I think Chase Claypool could have a Martavis Bryant caliber rookie season. Now, I'm not expecting him to have like 1,000 yards off the bat and things like that, because a lot of people got to understand. Just because the Steelers used their first selection of this past year's NFL draft on Chase Claypool doesn't mean they're automatically going to force him to contribute to this offense. Because he is going to have to work if he wants to get some playing time this year. Mike Tomlin doesn't just automatically hand out playing time to anybody. Doesn't matter how high the Steelers drafted you. You got to earn that right. Especially when you look at how crowded this receiver position is. A lot of you guys are sleeping on Dionne Kane. Dionne Kane is another guy who he didn't get a lot of targets last season because he didn't really get in all that much. But when he did get in, and the few amount of opportunities that he did get, he made the most out of them. So don't sleep on Dionne Kane. As of right now, I think Chase Claypool is the 4th best wide receiver on the Steelers roster. So how good he performs in training camp is going to determine how much playing time we're going to see Chase Claypool get at the start of the season. And also, he's going to have to earn Ben Roethlisberger's trust. Because as we've seen in the past, Ben Roethlisberger is a guy who isn't going to throw it to you a lot if he doesn't trust you, i.e. James Washington. So, Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson are going to be the 2 wide receivers that I'm going to be watching for the Steelers during training camp. Now we move on to the defense side of the football. I got my eye on defensive tackle Chris Wormley. Now, a big reason why I have my eye on him is because he's supposed to be replacing Javon Hargrave, who Javon Hargrave was really developing at a really impressive rate. He was coming on last year as a pass rusher and as a good run stopper. And I'm really a little bit sad that we weren't able to retain him this past offseason. So we go ahead and we trade for Chris Wormley. And I'm not really all that concerned about, making the trade at the tackle position. I'm a little bit concerned of who we made the trade with. We traded with our divisional rival, the Baltimore Ravens. If the Ravens, our rival, is able to feel comfortable enough to give up a player off their roster to us, I have a little bit of concerns. Because maybe they just don't think that he's good. But you know what they say, it is an old expression that goes, another man's trash is another man's treasure. Maybe Chris Wormley ends up being fantastic for the Steelers, and the Ravens made a mistake and gave us a stud player. But I mean, when you look at what the Ravens have did this offseason when it comes to making trades, they have pretty much robbed everybody. So I'm going to be having a really big eye on Chris Wormley this training camp. Because I want to see if the Ravens finesse the Pittsburgh Steelers for a draft pick. Because, I mean, if your divisional rival is comfortable enough to trade away a player to you, I don't really have a lot of faith. Now you got Isaiah Buggs. Now, Isaiah Buggs is going into year 2 out of Alabama. And I want to see him have a really big season. I want to see him step up. I want to see Isaiah Buggs have a good training camp. And I want to see this guy have at least 5 sacks this year. That is my expectations for Isaiah Buggs, is 5 sacks. And he also is going to be in the mix of potentially being one of those starters at one of those 2 tackle spots on the defensive line. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a position battle between Chris Wormley and Isaiah Buggs. Then you got outside linebacker Alex Highsmith, the rookie that we drafted out of Charlotte in the 3rd round of this year's NFL draft. Now, he had 15 sacks in his final year for Charlotte in 2019. And he could potentially end up with the strong training camp performance, finding his way onto the Pittsburgh Steelers pass rushing rotation. And I think this is a good opportunity for Alex Highsmith because he could end up potentially replacing Bud Dupree if the Steelers aren't able to work out a long-term deal with Bud Dupree this season and Bud Dupree becomes an unrestricted free agent next offseason. So I want to see Alex Smith. I'm interested in watching him. I'm also really intrigued in cornerback Justin Lane. Now, Justin Lane is in a really big spot because this is a guy who could potentially also be another guy who could end up being another potential starter down the road. Because Mike Hilton is looking for a long-term extension or a new deal. And he's regarded as either the best slot cornerback in the NFL or one of the top 3 slot cornerbacks in the NFL. So I want to see what Justin Lane does this year. And I especially want to see what he does in training camp. And the last 2 guys I have, Antoine Brooks Jr. out of Maryland. He is a guy who can play linebacker. He can play safety. He's a little bit versatile there. And you got cornerback Trojan Bandy. Now, I got Trojan Bandy on this list because Trojan Bandy played for my favorite college football team, the Miami Hurricanes. Now, ideally, he's really good when it comes to stopping the run. And he is a really physical press man-to-man corner. So I want to see what he does in training camp as well. And is he even going to make the Steelers roster? So this is it for my players to watch for the Pittsburgh Steelers during NFL training camp. Let me know what you guys think about it down in the comment section down below. Make sure that you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel for more NFL videos and content. And thanks for watching.